Okay, so now we'll switch to English just for this talk. To introduce Sheila McNeil. I'm very glad that you could come. For us, CITES is really an example, although our budget is much more limited, but CITES is really an example. They have a great impact in everything which is related to technology enhanced learning and standards in this area. So Sheila is assistant director at CITES. She works at the University of Strathclyde in Scotland. So we are looking forward to hearing all your insights. Thank you very much for coming.
Hola, buenos días. Muchas gracias por la invitación a presentar aquí y trabajo con los estudiantes en la universidad esta semana también. Pero me habla un poco de español y me nervioso hablar en español y me presentar en inglés. Gracias. So thank you very much for the invitation to present here today. I'm very honoured to come here and to be here, and particularly as this is, I believe, the first meeting of this group. So it's really interesting for me, and I'm always glad to share our experience and learn about what's happening in the rest of the world. So I'm from Scotland, as Carlos said, so if you can't understand what I'm saying or I'm talking too quickly, then please let me know and I'll slow down, or we'll try and work it out. So if you don't understand anything, please let me know. Just to give you a bit of an overview of what I'm going to do today, I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of context about CITES, who we are, what we do, and what kind of work we're involved in, and how we work with our funders, the JISC, and projects, as well as international partners and standards bodies. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on a little journey and show you some different views and some emerging views that are coming through in the UK and the technology enhanced landscape, particularly coming through from some of the programs that we're involved in. Over the last 2 years, I think the whole notion of mapping and modelling is becoming increasingly important for institutions, for teachers, for administrators, for senior management. So we're having a lot of different views and a lot of different maps of our institutions that are emerging just now. And then we have some time for some questions and answers and some discussion, and hopefully you'll be able to share with me some of the work that you're involved in as well. So, what is CITES? Well, CITES stands for the Centre for Educational Technology and Interoperability Standards. And we're a JISC Innovation Support Centre, and we support and provide advice to the UK higher education and further education sector, primarily on educational technology standards. So we really want to help the sector make use of technology in general, and where possible promote the use of open standards. Now, because the Centre for Educational Technology and Interoperability Standards takes quite a long time to say in any language, we just refer to ourselves as CITES, but that's what it actually means. We're a distributed organisation. As you can see in the map there, we are across the UK. Apart from Ireland, we have offices everywhere. We have 10 members of staff in the University of Bolton, which is quite near Manchester. We have 4 members of staff in the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, to the top there, and that's where I'm based. I've put down 1 member of staff at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh. Actually, at the moment, we've 2 members of staff. We've got somebody else working on a project just now at the moment. And we have some staff still in Bangor, which is in Wales, but they actually work for the University of Bolton. They just, we have an office in Bangor because when CITES started a long time ago, it was associated with the University of Bangor, and some people still work there. So we have quite a good spread across the university, and we are a very distributed organisation. JISC is our funder, and I'm not sure if anyone has heard of JISC, if you know what they are, but JISC stands for the Joint Information Systems Committee. This is from the JISC website, its mission statement. JISC wants to inspire UK colleges and universities in the innovative use of digital technologies, helping to maintain the UK position as a global leader in education. Probably the thing that JISC is best known for in the UK as well as in the rest of the world is the fact that it provides the broadband network for universities and colleges, and that's called Janet. So it provides that. It also provides help and support for environments for learning and teaching and research, and it has a number of advisory and consultancy services, of which one CETUS is one of these advisory and consultancy services. The way JISC is funded is that before each university in the UK is funded by the government, so before they get their grant, some money is top sliced and given to central services such as JISC. So every university in the UK actually does contribute towards funding the JISC, but they don't actually have to make an individual payment. It's taken off before they get their core grant from the government. So that's how it's funded. So everyone pays in and hopefully everyone gets benefit from it. Of course, I should say in the current economic climate, we don't know what the funding situation is going to be like. We have a very new government in place, and it seems that every week there's another raft of cuts coming into all public sectors. So although we have hopefully secure funding for the next year, after that, who knows? And I think that's the same throughout the world, and in Europe definitely. So again, one of the things that we try to do is to try and promote ways of promoting shared services and using standards to help spread some savings across the sector as well. JISC has 6 strategic aims, which I thought would be useful just to share with you. As I said, one of the things it's best known for is providing infrastructure, and hopefully by providing this solid ICT infrastructure, the broadband backbone, it can help institutions meet their missions in terms of teaching and learning and research provision. It also wants to help the promotion and development and effective use of ICT in learning and teaching, and also to support the development, uptake and use of ICT in research. It also wants to help develop ways of using IT for management within institutions, so in terms of administrative systems as well. We provide support through programs for that as well. And it also wants to develop and implement programs that can help institutions engage with the wider community, so whether that be the wider community as in yourselves here in Spain and in Europe, or with the wider community in the UK, with businesses and with other organisations as well. And of course, as every organisation always wants to continue to improve its own working practices. So that's JISC's overall strategic aims. In terms of CETUS, this is our mission statement. So this is what we say we're going to do, but I'll kind of explain what we actually do, but it is quite closely aligned. So through active engagement with the JISC community, we want to develop, facilitate and effective implementations and use of open standards that are needed for flexible and adaptable learning environments, learning services, learning resources, and we want to increase the choice of systems available and the software that's available by helping to maintain a healthy open market and support the development and the capabilities and good practices within our community. So we really want to foster engagement and make sure that there's a healthy marketplace that the community has an active role in as well. So that's our mission statement. We have 5 key aims, which I'll just go through with you just now. Our first key aim is to establish interoperability specifications, standards and application profiles that meet the needs of the JISC community. So this is probably what we're best known for, probably out with the UK, is our work on standards. We represent the UK sector on various standards bodies such as IMS, IEEE, CEN, various places. And we really make sure that the UK primarily the UK. Obviously that's our first interest, that the UK community is served through these standards bodies. And we try and make sure that the standards that are being developed meet the needs of our community. And then once we've done that within our community, we'll work to develop, where necessary, application profiles of standards and specifications that meet specific needs. And I'll talk about a couple of examples of them later on. Our second key aim is to promote and support the understanding, implementation and effective use and adoption of open learning technology specifications and standards. So it's not just about going to standards meetings and be very, very involved that way. We want to disseminate the information and share development practice and engage with the community as much as possible. And we also want to give advice to institutions about the use of standards, when to use them, when not to use them, because just because there are standards, it doesn't mean to say that you have to use them. You know, you have to look at the business case for when you want to use standards, and there may be cases when, although there is a standard, it's not necessarily the best thing to use in your context. We try to develop consensus among stakeholders about what should be adopted, and we try as much as possible to work with implementers, and that includes commercial vendors and primarily people engaged in our GIST programs, through a variety of means to develop coherent and consistent views. And we have a number of events. We've calling them plug fests here, but we tend to call them code bashes. So these are days where developers can come together with their systems and they can actually see if they can get some amount of or any level of interoperability with systems. So that's quite key in terms of developing standards, because through those events we can then feed back to the actual official standards bodies and say, well, actually this part of the specification isn't working or it is working, and that helps us feed back into the specification and standards development process. And of course, through doing all this, we support the UK community, and hopefully wider, not just the UK community. We support the community in building knowledge, capacity and good practice and sharing that. Our third key aim is the one that I like the best, and the one that legitimises really me being here today. We also have a remit to cooperate internationally to ensure that our aims are being met and making sure that we're working with the wider community. So we don't, although our primary audience is in the UK, we do have a lot of contact internationally, and we really do encourage and we want to work with partners all over the world. So if you are interested in following up anything that I speak about today, or you are interested in being involved in any of the work that we're doing, then we're more than happy to talk to you. So some of the things we do, we negotiate with partners, particularly in standards bodies, to negotiate, a common consensus. So sometimes it's easier when there's 3 or 4 of you that maybe have the same point of view to have more influence in a standards development meeting. And some of the bodies we work with SURF in the Netherlands. We do a lot of work with partners in the Australian Department of Education, which keeps changing its name, so I'm not quite sure what it's actually called at the moment. And we also do a lot of work with the ADL, who developed the SCORM in the States, and we have partnerships in Spain and in lots of other countries in Europe as well. Another thing that we sometimes do is we're sometimes asked to participate in government agencies and advisory groups on standards, so we do a bit of work around about there. Again, due to the sort of changing economic climate in the UK, we're not sure how that participation is going to pan out just now, because we're not sure if that work is going to continue at the moment. Our fourth key aim is to work very closely with JISC. Obviously they pay us, so we have to work very closely with them to support and the successful realisation of its strategies and programmes, and make sure that all our strategies are aligned for maximum effectiveness. You can tell that this was written, to tick all the boxes. And of course, our fifth key aim, like JISC, is we want to develop and maintain effective and efficient working practices. And in fact, over the last few years, our working practices have changed quite a lot. And I'll explain a bit about that as well. But we are evolving and we're using technology, I think, a bit better ourselves at communicating not only internally, but externally as well. So that's just kind of the context of JISC, our funders, and how we work with them and what we're supposed to do for them, and it's what we do, but I'll explain probably through the projects, the work that we do, how that actually manifests itself in reality. Excuse me a second. We have a public web face, and we have lots of resources that are available online. And there's just some snapshots. That's our website at the back, and the URL is down there. In terms of our working practices, one of the biggest changes that we've been through in the last couple of years is the actual use of staff blogs. So the main content of our website is through staff blogs. So there's about 20 staff, and we all blog. So there's a really kind of an almost constant update of news, so you get a really good spread of information across the organisation in terms of what we're working on. So if you are interested in finding out or maybe having a quick look at what's happening in the UK, then our website is quite a good place to start, because it's a lot of content. It's updated on a regular basis. And as I say, this the whole notion of blogging was quite a cultural change for us, because none of us really blogged before, and I personally wasn't very sure about it, but it's actually worked really well, and I find it a very effective, I personally find it a very effective way just to record what I'm doing and get contact with other people. And of course we have RSS feeds, and I think it's been really successful for us in terms of sharing what we're actually doing with not only our audience, but also internally, because we're a distributed organisation, I don't see many of my colleagues for months on end. So having blogs allows me to actually catch up and find out what they're working on, and make more effective communication internally in terms of points of view where we can work together and collaboratively. We also have a number of events that are open, so if you're ever in the UK, have a look at our events calendar, and if there's something on, you're more than welcome to come along to one of our meetings. There's no charge for our meetings. We also have a lot of resources from the meetings that we've run and various other things that we've done, and they're all categorized in topics, so you can search through the website and find quite a lot of information, and it's something we're continually working on and trying to improve our interface to make sure that we can share our knowledge as effectively as possible. We have a number of publications, and we try to each year produce a series of briefing papers. So in the last year, we've produced several. We've one on cloud computing for institutions, an overview of that. We also had a document which was really aimed at senior managers around the business case for standards, so why you might want to take a standards approach in your organisation. And we've also published a briefing paper on distributed learning environments, which I'll talk a bit more about later. And there's one that's just about ready. It's actually written. We're just waiting for it to be printed before it goes on the website, as one on semantic technologies. And all these briefing papers give quite a high-level overview of topics. They're usually between 4 and 6 pages long. They're all available for download on our website. They're all issued under Creative Commons licenses, so although they're in English just now, if you wanted to translate them into Spanish, we'd be delighted if somebody wanted to do that. So they're there, please use them. And they're really a way to sort of, I suppose, summarise some of the topic areas that we're working on and help explain some of the key points in each of these areas. We also do an annual horizon scan, and this is a bit more of kind of blue sky thinking, where we're looking ahead to possible new technologies that may impact our sector. So we do that as well. So we've quite a lot of publications, and as I say, they're all available from our website. As well as publications, excuse me, we also have developed a number of services. Again, these are all open source and available to download and adapt as you want. Some of you may have heard of the Reload tool, which was a content packaging tool. It was released, oh gosh, about 8 or 9 years ago as a reference implementation of IMS content packaging. It was really quite widely adopted. SCORM took it on and developed their own instance of it. That work then evolved into Recourse, which is a learning design editor and player. We also have a content transcoder service. So if you have a package, maybe an IMS content package, and you wanted to make it into an IMS common cartridge, you can just upload it into our transcoder service and it will give you back out a different format of content. And we're hoping that that will be developed, because it's open source, that somebody in the community might want to pick that up, because what we'd really like that to do is to be able to export different kinds of content for different systems. So if you could export into Moodle, into Blackboard, into various things. So we kind of hope that will happen, but it's there, as I say, it's open source, anyone can develop with it. Our most recent development is a tool called Archie, and Archie is a modelling tool, and it's based on the Archimate modelling language. Again, it's an open source tool, and it's just been released in the last month. We've been doing a lot of work across a number of programs where people are looking at sort of the underlying enterprise architecture of their organisation. And what we were finding was that there were quite a lot of modelling, there's quite a lot of modelling software available, but it's usually quite expensive. And sometimes it's not particularly appropriate to university needs. So the Archie tool is our sort of an attempt to bring something to the market that is open source, that anyone can download and use and start using. So that will probably develop as well over the coming months. But the way we get funding for these services is sometimes we can identify a gap in program development, and we can then get a bit of additional funding from JISC, and we can hire developers in to develop these services. So quite a range of services as well that are available. As well as our publications and our services, we're very much a community-driven organisation, and we run a lot of events, and in fact a lot of the roots of CETUS lie in community engagement. When CETUS started out, it really was more of kind of an umbrella organisation, if you like. We had, it was a project, but we had a lot of sub-projects, and they were funded to run special interest groups. And we had a number of them which are listed there. So we had accessibility, assessment, educational content, which was looking at sort of content packaging, enterprise, which was looking at back-end systems, metadata and digital repositories, which was looking at how you store learning content, and an e-portfolio group. So these were very closely aligned with standards development at the time. The way they were ran was that there were 4 meetings every year. There was a coordinator who used to go to relevant specification bodies, and they kind of managed that community, if you like. We also had 2 other groups which weren't quite SIGs in the sense that the others were. We had a pedagogy forum, and that was really to allow us to have more interaction with teachers. And that came about primarily after IMS Learning Design was released, because we had a lot more interest in our work from teachers at that point. And we also had the LLL group, the Lifelong Learning Group, and that was really a group to have some more engagement with further education colleges, because it was we were finding it was harder for staff in colleges to get away for a day to our events than in universities. So that worked for a while, but when we became an innovation centre, we kind of reassessed what we were doing, and some of the groups, particularly the educational content group, and that's actually where I had my first contact with CETUS. I used to go along to their meetings because where I was working, I was very interested in content packaging and the whole kind of learning object thing, and then learning design. But what we were finding was some of the standards were becoming, I suppose, quite mature. So the the actual events that we were running were becoming bigger events, and they were becoming more general. They were becoming more like sort of mini conferences almost. So we thought we'd change our model slightly. So now we have working groups, and these working groups have a shorter lifespan, and they tend to have specific outputs and a much smaller scale than the SIGs. We certainly still have our SIG communities, but we actually want to kind of refocus the work that we're doing. So the way we're doing that, I suppose it's to allow us to have a more agile response to community needs. So just to give you an example of some of the groups that we have a QTI, which is Question and Test Interoperability. It's an IMS specification. We have a profiling group just now, and they're working on a maths profile of QTI. So that should be released, I think, at the end of the summer. Last year we had, and that QTI group is very, very technical. It's very focused on the development of an application profile for QTI. Last year we had a Semantic Technologies in Teaching and Learning group, and that was completely different to the QTI profiling group. It was a group of invited experts who actually acted almost as an informal steering panel for a project that JISC had funded. And this project was a study into the use of semantic technologies in teaching and learning in the UK, because we felt that we kept hearing about the potential for semantic technologies in teaching and learning, but we weren't seeing a huge amount of evidence for it, so we just wanted to find out what was actually happening. So there was a project funded at the University of Southampton to do a survey, and as I say, this working group, it kind of lived alongside that project, and I worked very closely with them in terms of helping them scope the project, and then when they were submitting their report, helping them refine their final report that they were going to submit to JISC. We've also had a widgets working group, which is a group that I'm very involved in, and I'll talk a bit more about that, but that was looking at the development of widgets, and it's had a two-phase approach. The first phase was looking at the underlying infrastructure to allow us to implement widget technology within teaching and learning, and now we've kind of finished that phase. We're into a next phase, which is looking at implementation of widgets in actual teaching and learning. So that's kind of our community engagement, and it's very, very important for us to work with the community. Because we advise JISC, we need to know what the people on the ground are dealing with. We want to know the real issues that people are working with. So if you like, we're kind of like a bottom-up and a top-down organisation. And I sometimes think of us as a sponge in the middle, because we get lots of information coming from the top and we get lots of information coming from the bottom, and hopefully we absorb it properly, and then we can distribute it in the right way, and it's not just a complete mess and explosion. In terms of our programme support, I'll just go through how we support programmes. So as I said, through our community groups and through our briefing documents, we're trying to reflect the actual needs, the current needs of our community. So we do a lot of position papers. We work very closely with the JISC programme managers. So we will sometimes go to them with an idea for a programme, and we'll say, well, there's a lot of activity happening around here. I think that would be a good idea to maybe try and fund some activity. Or sometimes they'll come to us and say, we have X amount of money, have you any good ideas for programmes? That's probably never going to happen again now that they'll find some spare money. So we're involved, if we look at the sort of the bottom quadrant there, we're involved in helping draft consultations and bids. So what happens is we'll be involved with programme managers and identify a topic, and then a tender document will be written, and that will be made publicly available, and universities can then decide whether or not they want to apply for the funding. So universities bid. It's a competitive tendering process. There's a marking phase, so if we move up the chain, there's a marking phase. We're usually involved in marking of the bids, and then once we've decided which projects are going to get funded, we'll have involvement in maybe some early community events, and sometimes we'll have some early technical interventions with the projects. And what I mean by that is sometimes we'll get a project that submits a really good proposal, it's a great idea, sounds like it's going to do everything that we'd like it to do, investigate all the areas we would like them to. But there may be one or two things that are slightly unclear. So they may not have been, or they may not have given us very much or enough information about, say, the technologies that they're actually going to use. So in fact, just last week I was talking to a couple of projects that have just got funding, and we were just trying to get a bit more clarity around the actual technologies that they were going to use. So we'll be involved in that way. Then through the programme life cycle, we'll probably run a number of community events at that point. And we also do technology reviews with projects. We have an online database called Prod, which anyone can access, and I'll give you the URL for that at the end of the presentation. And we record all the technologies and standards that projects are using, and we record just their commentary on how they're finding the use of the technology and standards. So that's really useful for us, because what it allows us to do is to understand what projects are really doing technically. It allows us to make connections between projects that we're working on. It also allows us, in terms of a programme, to get a high-level view of any consistent things that are happening. So if everyone is using one standard, we can see that. Or if nobody is using a standard that we thought people might be using, it allows us to better understand why that is happening. So it allows us to identify gaps, problems and issues. And this kind of takes us back into the final quadrant there. So when the programme's finished, we can again sort of start the consultation, and hopefully there'll be ideas coming through the programmes that then again we might interpret into position papers, into maybe services, and then hopefully the whole cycle starts again. So that's how we support GIST programmes. Just to give you a sort of a slightly different view of this is a timeline, and it's particularly looking at some of the work around widgets and a call that's just been funded around distributed learning environments. So this is kind of like a timeline from the last 10 years, if you like. So you can see there's been various developments, starting with managed learning environments back in 2001, and then we moved to, in 2008, my colleague and I, Wilbert Cran, ran a session at our conference. Every year we have a conference, and it's usually quite a forward-thinking conference. There's a lot of discussion. There's not a lot of this PowerPoint in it. It's really kind of more of a hands-on talking conference. So we ran a session around planning and designing learning in a world of widgets, and that was really a chance for us to find out a bit more about some of the work that had been happening in a European funded project called 10 Competencies. And some of our colleagues at the University of Bolton had been working on integrating learning design and widgets. So we were looking at that, and there was an awful lot of interest from people in terms of using widgets or little applications in different platforms. So that's when we formed the Widgets Working Group. So we had that. We then produced the Distributed Learning Environments briefing paper, and in between time there had been a lot of work in terms of development of widgets, and our colleagues again at the University of Bolton had developed a widget server. So we now had some infrastructure in place in terms of allowing us to deploy some of this technology into learning environments such as Moodle and Blackboard. We did the briefing paper, and going back to, if we think back to that, what I was showing, the programme life cycle, during this time we're having lots of consultation with the programme managers. We had another session at our conference last year around composing new learning environments, looking at different models, potential models and technologies. And then in March we had a new call went out around distributed learning environments. So that's kind of shows you in kind of a timeline kind of a way how we engage with our community and with JISC, and then we get calls. So that's just another view of the work that we do. So that's about CETUS. So now I'll actually talk about what I think probably most of you want to hear, is some of the emerging views of the current landscape just now. So Well, if you want, I don't know if a lot of you use Wordle and word clouds and tag clouds. Yeah, well, I thought this would give you sort of one view. This is a different view of the program support activity that we're involved in. So you can see some of the key things that are coming out just now are words like curriculum, standards, not very surprising there, learning, relationships, management, semantic. So it's quite a mix of things, and that's just one way to look at what we're involved in. This is a list of programs that we currently support. There's quite a range of activity. Curriculum design and curriculum delivery I will talk a bit more about, but they're looking at the design program is looking at the overall approach to curriculum design. So that's how you go through a course approval process. And the curriculum delivery project is looking more at the sort of the actual delivery to students end of things. We have a program on customer relationship management and student life cycle relationships. So that's really more about kind of the business end, about how institutions engage with students. It's quite interesting. We also have a program called Flexible Service Delivery. This is not funded by the e-learning program. This is funded by another part of JISC, but this is looking at, if you like, underlying enterprise architecture and the potential for developing shared services, open source, hopefully as well. We also have a program that's looking at lifelong learning for workforce development. So that's really about looking at the needs of the industry and how universities are actually developing more work-based programs of study. We've also just finished phase 1 and about to start phase 2 of quite a large open educational resources project. Doing some work around portfolio interoperability. We've got some PIOP work there, and a specification called LEAP is coming out of that work. We also do a lot of work around a standard called XGRI, which is exchanging course-related information, which is quite an interesting standard. It's primarily about how you can share. Well, the first instance of XGRI is more the kind of marketing information about a course. So for the name of the university, the name of the course, the type of course it is, whether it's a postgraduate degree, an undergraduate degree, how long it might last, that kind of information. And we're now looking at how we can extend that to add some more fields to that. And the Distributed Learning Environments Programme, which has just started, the projects have just heard they've got their funding, so that will kick off probably at the end of next month. So in terms of understanding our landscape, as I said at the beginning, I think it's modelling and mapping is becoming increasingly important, particularly in our current economic climate. We really, really need to know what's happening within our institutions, what systems we have, how they can work with each other, what workflows we have in place, and what processes we have in place. And not just technological processes, but human processes as well. Because although there is a lot of potential for shared services and potential for sectoral-wide savings, they'll only be there if we have systems in place that can actually utilise them and use them. So we need to understand our systems to make sure that we can improve them and enhance them with any kind of common shared services. So when we think of an institution, I think there's some key questions we need to ask ourselves. What does an institution actually look like? What sorts of representations would we use to describe an institution, and where do we have them, and what ones do we really need, and where do we need to use them? Are we talking about representations for the classroom in terms of learning design? Are we talking about information for course approval boards in terms of actually getting your course and your curriculum approved? Are we talking about more infrastructure models for IT services? And of course it's a combination of all of these, but we need to think about how we create these maps and these models. We need to think about who creates them and who looks after them. And we also need to think about how we share and how we evolve them. So hopefully I'll kind of start to address some of the work that's been investigating some of these questions. So just thinking about, you know, in terms of what an institution looks like, I was just thinking about, well, what does my institution look like? Well, in Strathclyde, I have, as a kind of a member of staff, I have a view. This is the intranet. There's the web page, and then there's the learning environment, which Learn Online, and then there's the actual physical campus. And yes, we did get a photograph on the one sunny day in Glasgow when we had a bit of blue sky there. So it's kind of a combination of things, and I think where you work in the university, you have different views of the university and what it actually means, whether it's more the physical space or the virtual space, or increasingly for us all, it's a mix of them all. So that's one view. Of course, there could be this more kind of technical infrastructure view, which again is important, and some institutions have this in parts, some of them don't. But I think what we probably want to be working towards, this is the logo for a project called OpenStreetMap. Oh, I don't know if any of you heard of OpenStreetMap. Well, basically, it's, I see a few nodding heads. It's kind of Google Maps, but done in an open linked data way, so anyone can contribute to this. I wanted to use this particularly because it was an example of open data being used. So I think probably what we want to be working towards is a situation where we have something almost like the educational equivalent of Google Earth. So we have the Earth, and we can zoom in and we can see a building, and then we can have the street view, or we can have, which is like a map, a grid map, or we can have the actual photographic view. So I think we want to try and be in a situation where we can try and get that information for universities and institutions. So it doesn't matter what role you have in the institution, you should be able to use information about the institution to find out things that are relevant to you. So I think that's what we want to be working to, where we have lots of data that is in a form that is shareable and reusable across institutions and also beyond institutions as well. Now, what we have in reality is something quite different. I don't know if you've seen this. This is the Clinky Atlas. This is the biggest book in the world. And when I saw this, it really kind of clicked with me. It's a 17th century atlas of the world. And as you can see, it's about the height of a man. It takes 2 people to open it. This is the first time in about 200 years that it's actually been taken out of the vault at the British Museum. There's a very interesting exhibition, which I think is still on in the British Museum, about the history of maps. So this is why this Clinky Atlas has been brought out, because it's never brought out. And it's got lots and lots of information in it. And when I saw it, it made me think about lots of institutions, because I think what we have, particularly in universities, is we do have lots and lots of information about a university, and some of it is absolutely beautifully presented, you know, like this very intricate map here. And some of it is absolutely meaningless to other people, but a lot of it is hidden away, and it's maybe beautifully bound in a lovely book. But because it's so big and unwielding, we just keep it in the attic and we never bring it out. So I thought this was quite a nice metaphor for actually the state of some of our university information. So if you want to have a look at it, if you're in London, I think the exhibition is still on. So in terms of how we're trying to make sense of the current landscape, we're getting a lot of information, not only from things that are happening outside the education community, but particularly from these programs, from the Curriculum Design and Delivery program, from the Distributed Virtual Learning Environments program, and from the Open Educational Resources, and from the Flexible Service Delivery. So the Curriculum Design and Delivery programs, they're giving us some information about, a lot of information about institutional processes in terms of curriculum design and delivery and how that actually works within an institution. And it's really quite interesting how many different parts of an institution are involved in that process. The Distributed Learning Environments program, that's us kind of almost giving potential infrastructure and architecture models to the sector to get them to work with them and build them. The Open Educational Resources is giving us a different view of the world, because what's happening with that is we're now creating learning resources and we're making them openly available. So I'm not sure if it's the same in Spain, but certainly in the UK, much of our or many teaching and learning resources, they're not even in institutional repositories. They tend to just be kept either in a teacher's desktop or in their laptop or in the virtual learning environment, so they're not accessible to anyone out with your institution. So now with the open educational resources, they're out there in the big World Wide Web for anyone to find and use. So hopefully this time next year we'll have a bit more information about how people are actually using these resources. We've got some pictures of how many people are actually accessing them and using them, but we should get more information on how they're actually being used. And of course the flexible service delivery, that's kind of again more of the architecture, underlying architecture models and services that we could potentially look at. So that's where we're getting some of our information just now. In terms of the curriculum design and delivery programs, we have 12 projects. They're funded for almost 4 years, and they're looking at the high-level processes involved in curriculum design. And it's kind of, they've just finished a baselining process, so they were having a look at their institutions and finding out exactly where they were in terms of curriculum design and course approval. So what were the processes, what were the maps in each of their institutions, and they have an ideal vision of where they would like to be and how they can improve those processes. The delivery program, it has 15 projects. They're shorter, 2-year projects. They're actually finishing in October this year. And they're looking at how you can help learners achieve the best results from a design curriculum. There's some information on all the projects. There's a nice aggregated site, which the URL is there. And I know these slides are going to be made available, so you don't need to worry about the URLs, but you can find out information about the projects there. This is one model that we've kind of looked at for curriculum design and delivery in terms of the whole curriculum life cycle, and this was developed by my colleague Helen Beethan. So you can see we've outlined, I hope you can see that, there's a number of key areas from approve, communicate, resources, deliver, initiate, review, and we've taken a circular approach because really you could start the curriculum design and redesign process really at any point, and you can see design and delivery are kind of intertwined as well. So that's one view that we've been working on, and this is just this in a bit more detail. There's quite a nice short publication that outlines some of the work that's just starting to come through from that, that you can download that from the JISC website, so it gives you a bit more information about that. But that's one view, it's not the only view, it's just something that we felt kind of explained what was happening within the programs. But what we're actually finding is, going back to maps, that I don't know if you have a phrase in Spanish that's the same, but in English, in olden times, when people were just making maps, if there was somewhere in the world that they didn't know about, they always used to say, "There be dragons," and nobody went there because that's where the dragons were. So again, as part of the exhibition where the atlas is, the BBC have done a really nice series of programs called The History of Maps. And I think what we're finding from the curriculum delivery curriculum design program in particular is that when you actually start looking at institutional processes, you have kind of almost this kind of medieval map of the world, in that sometimes you have very intricate processes and workflows, and they have very much one view of the world. So with this one, you know, if you put that in a university context, that might be the president or the vice chancellor of your university up at the top there. But at the bottom down here, there are lots of areas where nobody really knows what's going on, and that's where the dragons live, and we don't go there. So at certain parts of course approval, what we're finding is there's lots of documentation, and some of it is beautifully intricate like this map, but it's not being reused effectively, and people are recreating documentation, and sometimes nobody actually knows how an idea actually gets through the whole course approval process. So there's lots of different uncharted waters that we're finding. So what we're finding, there is a big disjunct between the actual course approval process and the course delivery. So if you have an idea for a new course, by the time you've gone through all the institutional processes and done the paperwork, the final piece of paper actually bears very little relationship to what's being delivered in the classroom. We have some very complex workflows in universities, which is probably not a surprise, but they're very complex and sometimes unnecessarily complex. And there's a huge lack of interoperability and integration with systems, and probably more importantly with documents. So there's lots of documents and information being recreated at various stages in the process, instead of having data that can be reused and reshared at relevant parts of the process. That's just not happening. There's a lack of standards that can help us with this, and we need to develop new ones or extend things such as EXCRI, the Exchange of Course-Related Information, because just now it just really covers marketing information. So for a course delivery approval process, you'd want to have more information about the actual teaching and learning outcomes. So there is some work happening with EXCRI at the moment. It's working through CEN, and there's a standard called the MLO, metadata for learning opportunities, and they're looking at combining those two, so that should be quite useful for us. The other thing we're finding in the UK just now is that practically every university is reviewing its teaching and learning provision, and I'm not sure if that's just because everyone's license for Blackboard is running out, but lots of people are looking at their learning and technology provision. There are lots of cuts in universities, so people are looking at how they can become more effective. So these projects are actually finding that in some ways they're becoming quite crucial to some of the changes that institutions want to implement. In terms of curriculum delivery, well, this program has been more about, I suppose, innovation with existing technologies. And what we're finding here is that VLEs are now totally embedded in institutions, and they're central to any teaching and learning provision. What the programme is doing is done a lot of work in around assessment, and not just looking at formative assessment at the end of a course, but looking at assessment as a way to actually design and redesign courses and deliver assessment in different ways. We're finding that mobile delivery of teaching and learning is increasing. But we've got a mix of staff and student experience of using mobile and social and personal technologies. So although technology can offer many things, there are some drawbacks. And one example of this was in one of the projects we're doing some work in geography field trips. So students were going out to locations doing field work, and the course delivery wanted to use text messaging and also use people, if they had camera phones, to take photographs that when they were on site, that some of them could be geotags, and they were sent back to the virtual learning environment. So students that weren't on the field trip were able to build up a picture of what was happening there. And that's great, and it seemed, it sounded like a really, really good use of technology. But interestingly, what some of the staff were saying was, by the students taking photographs of the site, they were actually losing a key skill in field sketching. So for a geologist, it's very important to make an accurate field sketch. So although you can tag photographs and annotate them, the staff just felt that wasn't quite as good as a field sketch. So lots of different things coming through there. And of course, one of the key things that these projects, now they're coming towards the end of their life cycle, is how they actually sustain some of the changes that they've introduced. But going back to the ideas of maps, one project I did want to talk to you and show you a bit more about was a project called Dynamic Learning Maps at the University of Newcastle. And this, I think, is taking quite an innovative approach to views of the course and the curriculum for both staff and teachers. So it's allowing people an interactive way to navigate through a curriculum. So it's pulling in information from the virtual learning environment, from libraries, from portfolio systems, from lots of different areas, and it's allowing students to actually tag and add resources to their own learning maps as well. So hopefully I'll get there's a very short video that can demonstrate this, which I think will be better than me trying to explain it. So I'll let Gordon explain.
Hi, welcome to the Dynamic Learning Maps podcast. My name is Gordon Skelly. I'd like to give you a quick demonstration of the state of the Dynamic Learning Maps tool in Newcastle. I'm just logged into the system as a Stage 1 student, and the first thing they see is their learning maps. This is a kind of a list of the actual kind of topic trees that they've actually been assigned to. Example here, we've got anatomy and psychology, conditions, skills frameworks, core presentation, outcomes, and specialties and units. If I expand the unit and sessions element, we start to see the actual structure of the course in Newcastle. If we have a look at the strands,
you might not be able to understand what
the
Gordon is saying because he's
strands.
from Newcastle, and I
Expand
can't
that
understand
again, and
sometimes
have a look
what
at
he
the,
says, but basically
54
this is the course view.
strand. First thing you'll notice inside that kind of topic is it's kind of split down into sessions, themes, and degree program outcomes. The outcomes themselves are an interesting kind of connection because that's actually linked into a different topic tree which is available from the actual homepage itself. We've also got some connections to other kind of topics in the topic maps and the parent topics in the tree. If we have a look at the particular themes, you can see these are the actual kind of sub kind of topics within inside PVD4, and we've also got this lectures, and all these lectures are coming from the actual virtual learning environment. So if I was to have a look at one of those, I'd be pulling resources directly in from the actual learning support environment. On the right hand side, before we actually kind of have a look at those lectures, you'll see there's some curriculum resources, there's a study guide, and there's a lot of reading lists elements attached to this particular kind of topic. If I have a look at giving bad news as a lecture, the resources will change on the right hand side. We're now pulling in resources specific to that session in the course, the lecture giving bad news, and the first thing we see, the curriculum resource. There's only one curriculum resource, but it's the actual kind of PowerPoint slides from that lecture. But there are some external resources. These are different, and these are resources the students are uploading and adding to the system themselves. We're allowed to comment on them, and the stars reflect a kind of a rating system where students have actually voted whether they think this resource is any good. There's also an option to reflect on any topic in Learning Maps. So for example, if I wanted to reflect on this particular lecture or make a note about it, I could pop up the reflect on topic dialog box, type some in the text, type some notes, give it a classification such as my evidence, and start doing some tagging. By default, the actual lecture itself and the code of the lecture is a default tag, but I might decide this is really applicable to a particular skill, like dermatology, and there's some kind of predictive text that recognises what you're typing in, and pediatric dermatology, and I click submit, and that will get fired off into the portfolio system and available from our virtual learning environment. There's also a new feature called feeds, where we can attach news feeds to the topics. An example here is only one feed, but if I click on it, it gives me a pop-up box, and you'll see there's an option to add feeds. But if I just click on the RSS icon itself, we get a drop-down list that expands out to show the actual kind of the current feeds coming in. And if I clicked on one of those, I would go off to the relevant journal article. This example. What I'd like to do now is go back up to the actual home page and try an alternative view on my learning map, and this time look at the specialties. I'll choose dermatology again. And this time, rather than view it as a list of text, what I'd like to do is view this as a mind map. So same information is available this time. It's just expanded out into a mind map. And if I would have a look at a particular lecture, just skin.
So I just wanted to show you that. So that's actually showing you how you can pull in resources from a virtual learning environment, use external resources maybe from your repository, and add your own tagging to to resources as well. So I think this is really, really interesting, this project. It's based in the medical faculty at Newcastle, and the reason they thought about doing this is not only is it quite good for students in terms of it allows them to have a bit more personalisation and a bit more kind of involvement in the curriculum, they also have a lot of staff that come in that maybe don't teach all the time, so they'll maybe have some medical staff that maybe come in just to do 1 or 2 guest lectures. So they really don't have an idea of what level in the curriculum students are. So if they're teaching 3rd year medical students, they have no idea really about what they do and don't know about certain topics. So it's another way for staff to look in and see what resources and what is already there, what the students have already gone through. So it's quite an interesting project, yeah, it's worth looking at. And I think, again, just looking at the whole notion of maps, this is I think really one of the most exciting projects that's come out of these 2 programs. Just want to quickly move on through some views and I suppose some models that we're providing to the community in terms of distributed learning environments. And when we talk about distributed learning environments, we're talking about how we can build on existing technologies such as learning environments like Moodle, Blackboard, Desire to Learn, those sorts of things, and how we can have a bit more of a lightweight, user-centered approach to enhancing these environments. So instead of waiting for Moodle or Blackboard to make the next release, we can actually add some tools and services into these systems at the moment. And as I've said before, we have a program that's starting next month looking at that. So we've outlined 5 models. So this first model is looking at how you can actually, instead of having everything in the VLE, how you can have an external platform that then can broadcast to different areas. So you don't have to have your learning materials just available in the VLE. If you wanted to put them into a blog or maybe something like Facebook or even into a phone application, you could do that. I won't go through all these examples with you. There's quite a nice example from a company called iCodium, which is showing how they actually structure their content in a format called IMS Common Cartridge. And by doing that, it gives the user much more control over how they actually distribute that content, because every resource within that package has a unique identifier or a URL. So you can decide to put bits of your resources and deploy them in various places. So on this site, they have a video on YouTube. They have a course chapter that's linking to their repository, and they also have an assessment that's been developed in QTI. So instead of that all being available in the VLE, it can be if you want it. They've got it. They're distributing it through a blog. So this system has quite a lot of strengths in that you can integrate it quite well with current systems. There is a growing developer community around this work, and what we find is quite easy deployment onto many platforms. iCodium have got this working on a number of different learning platforms, including most of the big ones. One of the weaknesses with it is, although you can distribute your learning content in different areas, there's not as yet a really secure way to have data going back into your learning environment. So if you were doing some kind of assessment activity, you would really be thinking of more kind of formative assessment as opposed to summative assessment. There are some competing standards, but that's not a huge problem at the moment. But although we have got some examples of implementation, it's still at early stages just now. The second model we have is how you can just plug in different services into a virtual learning environment. So say, for example, if you use Moodle and you want to have an asynchronous chat for your class, but you actually hate the chat client that's in Moodle and you'd actually rather use something else. Well, you can do that. You can actually plug in a different chat client if you want, and this is using a specification called IMS LTI. I won't show this video, but there's a really nice example of this that has been recently published by Chuck Severance, who is really the key, I suppose, developer and I suppose a supporter of IMS LTI, and he was working earlier this month at the Open University, and they have a mapping tool called Cohere. And he has a really nice video demonstration. It lasts about 10 minutes, showing him running Cohere in Moodle. So it's integrated within Moodle. He also had it integrated using LTI. It's running in Blackboard, in Sakai, and Desire to Learn. So that's just an example of, so you can actually add services and extend the functionality of a virtual learning environment without having to wait for the upgrade or buy an upgrade. So the strengths of this is actually because it's a plug-in into the VLE, there is some data, there is data integration, all the grouping and things that you do within your VLE, that LTI will keep that, so you can set up groups in Moodle and then use them with these external services. Again, there's a growing developer community, and there's the potential to have lots and lots of different tools that we could share across the sector. So we could hopefully get to a point where we have kind of the app store for education, you know, that Apple have, and you can just say, right, I want to have this chat client, this assessment tool, I'll put them down here, and it won't matter what learning environment you use, you just download it and it will automatically plug into your system. The weaknesses just now is that it's tied into your VLE, it's linked into the VLE, unlike the first model where you have services being deployed externally to the VLE. The IMS specification is still under development, but it will be developed soon, and basic LTI is working. But it's not so good for integrating social media tools, so things like Facebook. At the moment, I'm sure that is going to change. So the third model, these they've got very long titles. There's many widgets into the web from one widget container. It's very difficult to say, even harder in Spanish, I would imagine. But this is kind of probably the closest we get to a personal learning environment. I don't know if any of you use iGoogle or NetVibes or PageFlakes, any of these kind of page aggregators. So this is basically a way where you can have a site, the widget container, this container here, and you can pull in different resources from the web and very quickly make a sort of a very informal learning environment. And you can also pull in some university data if it's available as well. This is an example of a NetVibes page that was made by a project in Scotland called it was the Employability Network, Scottish Higher Education Employability Network, Sheen Sharing. They've made a NetVibes site. This was a group of people who were working on projects around employability for students, so how to work with companies and help graduates I suppose show to potential employers that they had lots of graduate attributes and the things that employers were looking for. And they started off with a mailing list, and they had lots of documents and lots of things they wanted to share. And one of the people that works in this project works in the same department as I do in Strathclyde, and we were having a chat one day, and she said, you know, I think we really need some kind of repository so we can share all our stuff. And I was like, oh no, I don't really think you need any kind of repository, because she thought she was going to try and get some money to build one. And we said, well, why don't you actually look at some of the Web 2 tools that are out there? There's lots of bookmarking and sharing and websites that are available that you could build something for nothing. So that's what they've done. And if you have time and you want to have a look at how a project can use a lot of technology for free, and actually how you can engage people and get people to start using Web 2 technologies, this is a really good example of it, because they were dealing with people that had never heard, hardly ever went onto the internet, never mind had heard about things like Delicious or Flickr or various things. So there's lots of videos in that as well. Very nice example of this kind of environment. The strength of this approach is that it's relatively easy to set up. You just go on to netvibes.com and it kind of takes you through the process, or iGoogle or PageFlakes or any of the other ones. There's very little cost involved. Most of the things are freely available, and the tools and services are there. It's kind of pulling in RSS feeds. Sorry, and it's a good demonstration of how you can start to aggregate resources. So if people, I think in terms of introducing people to the notion of personalising the web, it shows people how you can start pulling in the information that you want and having it in a place that you want without having to rely on web developers. So it's quite powerful. And it's kind of quite good, interesting, I think, for students if you wanted to get them to build collaborative learning environments as well. The weaknesses are, although it's easy to set up, you might need some technical confidence. You might sort of kind of need to know how to use a computer and kind of how to get an RSS feed. So I think maybe you need to show people how to cut and paste and just where you find RSS feeds and those sorts of things. So some confidence needed, but not a huge amount. Although these services are freely available now, they might not always be, and I think that's a risk when you're using any kind of service that claims to be free. They might just turn around tomorrow and say that they're going to charge you for it. And of course, with these systems just now, there's no integration with institutional systems. You can have a bit of integration with social networking sites. So for example, I have a personal NetVibes page and I can integrate with Facebook, with Twitter and with my university email, but it's just kind of a basic authentication. I think that may change, but just now it's not as strongly integrated as the previous models. And as I was saying, there's kind of limited scope for authentication, but that is kind of changing because there's a lot of movement in terms of authentication at the moment. The fourth model is kind of, I suppose, really based on the Google Wave model. I know that some of you, because I know some faces here, have any of you used Google Wave at all? Yeah, people. So this is kind of changes the architecture of things. So it's kind of almost looking at a more federated architecture where you have lots of different providers and clients and they're working collaboratively together. So this is a very different model than the other ones, which are quite traditional. So this is just an example of, if you haven't seen Google Wave, this is a Google Wave page, so you can chat here and there's lots of different ways, which are just sort of different conversations. So that's just an example to show you if you haven't seen it. The strengths of this model is that it's highly interactive. You know, Google Wave, if you used it, is very, very interactive. And because of that, it's very collaborative and it's very flexible. The weaknesses are that it's a relatively new technology, so there's not a huge amount of implementation, even less than the other ones at the moment. And it does have quite a lot of usability issues. So I think you have to really think quite carefully about that. But again, it could have a lot of potential. Our fifth and final model is both a provider and a client. So this is kind of a very different architecture again. It's more kind of a federated architecture, and this is really based on a system called Sakai, which I'm not sure if you've heard of, but this is something that there's a lot of Sakai implementation in the United States, not so much in Europe. But it does give you some flexibility in where you want to deliver your content. It doesn't all have to be in the VLE. You can have it going out to phones and to blogs, etc. Not a huge amount of implementation of this in the UK. I think there's only 2 institutions, but the University of Cambridge have been doing work with Sakai, and they've been integrating some widgets, and they've gone down the Google route, and they've done the open social implementation of that, so you can have a look at some of that. Again, with all these models, what I'm showing you is the underlying architecture. For the user, a lot of it doesn't really matter because you're just accessing your learning environment, maybe on your phone instead of within the VLE, so it doesn't really matter that much to the user. This is more kind of the back end stuff. So the strengths of this model is, well, it's very flexible. You can use systems in a way that lets each system play to its strength. And in some ways, it's kind of what you would call a truly distributed architecture. And it's got many sharing options in terms of functionality. The weaknesses, there are not many implementations. I'm not sure about Europe, mainland Europe, I'm sorry, but certainly within the UK, there's not that many implementations. But it's quite a heavy payload on the provider and the client. And although it's a distributed, a distributed architecture, there is just the one single point of failure, though that probably wouldn't happen. So again, I think that the last two models are the ones we've probably got the least experience in. But the DLE program that's just starting, we have projects that are going to be looking at these models, so hopefully by this time next year we'll have an increased understanding of whether these actually are feasible in reality in terms of actually scaling them up and using them in an institution. So I'd be glad to hear that's me just about at the end. So I think the things I would just like to sum up is that unsurprisingly, we know our landscape is changing. And I think what's happening now, we're starting to be able to identify the key integration points between administrative systems and pedagogic systems. So we're starting to identify exactly where and when people and systems need to integrate with each other. And we are starting to see some more effective ways of sharing data, particularly through XRE, and we would really like to promote the use of linked data so that data within institutions is reusable and findable in as open a way as possible. I mean, obviously there is some data that you wouldn't want to be available out with your institution, but even internally in your institution, we need to get more effective at sharing our data. But able to do this, we need lots of support. Institutions need lots of support, and I think it's not just about the technology changes, it's about the cultural changes, and it's about the human processes as well. So that's me. Thank you very much for your time, and I think we've got a bit of time now for questions.
Yes, I have a question. Are you doing anything on serious games or in more interactive content?
Just now, JISC aren't funding any programs really around that area. There's been quite a bit of activity around virtual worlds. I personally haven't been involved in that, and that there is activity in the UK around that area. It's just not something that we've done a huge amount of work in. So again, with these models, we haven't actually included explicitly, sort of the integration of gaming environments, but there's no reason why that should be excluded. It's not particularly mainstream at the moment, so there are pockets of research, but we haven't really done an awful lot in that area.
And I have a second question. You are working also in modeling about how to teach. And are you using LAMs from Australia?
Yes, there are some institutions that use LAMs. It's been quite interesting. I've been involved in learning design, JISC involvement in learning design for a long time. And 2 years ago, we had a program called Design for Learning, and we had a number of projects that were using LAMs, and we had a number of other projects that were using other systems and developing things. In the current curriculum delivery program, I was really surprised because nobody was using LAMs. Nobody's been using any kind of formal learning design system at all. And I'm not really sure why this is. And I'm not sure whether it's maybe a cultural thing in the UK that's maybe enough people know about LAMs, but I think people just don't think that it's appropriate for university teaching. I think James and some people in LAMS would agree with this as well. It's maybe more appropriate for more schools-based learning. And I know one of the projects in the Design for Learning programme, they were looking at a problem-based learning approach, and they found LAMS was a bit limiting for them in actually trying to implement that. And I know there's a lot of work happening in LAMS to improve it, but we don't actually have a huge amount of uptake of formal learning design systems within the UK. And I'm not sure why, and I don't know whether it's actually some academic snobbishness, actually, that the teachers don't want to use a system because they can do it themselves. I don't know, but we're still doing work around that. We're still very interested in learning design, and in fact, next month there's the European LAMS conference is in Oxford, and the day after I'm running a design bash where we can hopefully we'll have a number of systems there around learning design, and we'll have a look at it, and there will be a number of projects from the delivery and design programs there as well. So yeah, we know about it, but there's not a huge amount of uptake of it.
Okay, thank you very much.
When you commented about mashing up contents from the net, you talk about this problem that at some point the contents may disappear or may stop being free or things like that. What do you think about the alternative, which is basically, first of all, being sure that the license of the materials are going to allow me to redistribute them, and then basically getting the materials, doing the mass up on my side, so that for the future the materials are going to be there because I'm responsible of them.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very good point, and I think you have to, particularly for teaching and learning, if you are going to use open resources, then yes, the license is absolutely important, and you have to make sure that they are released under a license that you can use, and they won't just disappear. I think for what I was meaning more in that example was that actually the NetVibes, the system itself, might start charging. So you might be in a position that you might not be able to do that. But if the content that you're using is openly available, then of course, yes, you can just take it off to another system and use it. But yeah, that's increasingly important about making sure if you are releasing or using content from other sources, that you know that its provenance and you know about its licensing and it's clear. And also, I suppose conversely, if you're releasing content, that you make sure that you have it properly licensed, and that's clear within your institution about how you do that. So, I mean, the OER program, it was quite interesting. Again, in terms of standards, we didn't actually mandate any standards for the projects to use. They were strongly recommended to, obviously they had to be open licensing. They had to be released under an open license, and they were given a strong steer towards Creative Commons. And most of them actually have used Creative Commons. I think there was 1 or 2 cases, and I think that was in a medical situation. It was medical resources that were being released, and I think I can't remember what other license they used. It was still an open one, but it wasn't Creative Commons. But yeah, that's been quite interesting. And again, going back to standards, again, no packaging standards were mandated in that program. So it was quite interesting that we had a lot of people who'd never heard of things like content packaging or SCORM, and they were coming to us and saying, so we have all the resources and we want to kind of put them somewhere and bundle them up, and how will we do that? And you know, it was quite funny for us that they hadn't heard of that. But again, things are changing, because the other thing in the OER program that we did was we wanted to look at the use of syndication. So we really encouraged people to use RSS and Atom. So I think a lot of the work that we're certainly progressing on is kind of making more effective use of these kind of syndication feeds, and how you contain licensing information and more metadata within the RSS feeds themselves. So there's lots of work going on around about that just now as well.
Nope.